This channel is for educational purposes only. Please do your own due diligence before making any investment decisions. Hi, this is Joe Rabil with Invest Like a Pro. So we're going to get back into the S&P again. Want to do our weekly update, and I'm going to go through the market conditions today because there's just been some changes. I think they're worth noting, and try and get through a few other indexes as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Lots of volatility taking place. So we want to make sure we take a step back, not get too emotional about what we're seeing, and see if we can decipher what's really taking place. So let's get into the charts. On the left, I've got the market conditions. So market conditions are telling us what type of condition we have, okay? I mean, is this a good environment? Is it a good market condition to be investing? Do we want to be really aggressive buyers, or do we want to get out of the market, or what? So that's how we want to look at these conditions. We want to see if we can put together enough information and maybe create a weight of the evidence that's suggesting one side is heavily weighted or over the other side. So what I've got is a trend in momentum. I've got MWDH twice here. First time is for the trend, and the second time is for the momentum. I'm going to go into that on the charts in a minute. So let me go ahead and get into the volatility. So the volatility has changed since the last time I updated this. We are now above a rising moving average. That means the ATR over here on the right, the average true range, which is this red line, is now rising above its moving average. Now, we've seen this happen a few times. What's missing in this instance is a test of the line or a test of the low, and then a turn back to the upside. I do like to see that kind of reversal pattern take place. We don't have that yet, but we have a very aggressive move to the upside, and the volatility, despite the fact that the market's trying to rally a little bit, isn't shifting back to the downside. So I think as long as this volatility stays up, the risk levels in the market are very high, and we should, one thing I can promise you, I mean, I'm not quite sure which direction the market really wants to go right now, but I can promise you more volatility for now. Okay, so and then also the overbought oversold RSI 5 on the weekly chart is at 45. Now this got pretty oversold. It got down to the low 30s, similar to where we saw it in November of 2020 on this pullback. And so not a deep oversold reading where we hit the 30 level or lower, but at the same time, it's worked off a lot of the overbought condition on the weekly. The other thing the reason why I think this is important is because now the sentiment has dropped to 18%. I mean, I think the last time I did this was at 28. And just keep in mind, about 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, something like that, maybe more like 7 weeks ago, we were up at 48%, meaning 48% more bulls than bears. And now we're only at 18% more bulls than bears. So the bullishness has dropped off significantly, and it's the reason why the last time I brought this up and did the market conditions, I felt like the odds of a big drop weren't all that substantial. Because I thought we were getting more, the bullishness was dropping too fast, and I thought that would limit the downside. So that could be the case, and it could very well be that we've already seen a low. I think the jury's out on that subject personally, but let's get into the trend and decipher that a little bit more. The first thing I want to do, though, on the right, before I get into the trend and momentum on all the time frames, I do want to just look at this weekly and daily over on the right. So the weekly's at the bottom over here, and we can see we have an 18 and a 40 that are both rising. So yes, I mentioned in Tuesday's video that this was considered a break of this moving average because we closed below the 18 on this weekly bar, and then we took out the low of that bar. So that constitutes a break of the moving average. What we don't have is a moving average that's rolled over yet. So right now, both of these moving averages are still rising. I have price above the 40, kind of right at the 18 right now, and both lines rising. So in this time frame, I'm still constituting it as a positive trend. Now, if we go look at the daily, one of the things I brought up was the fact that if we break the downtrend line on the daily chart, then we go back into like a transitional phase coming back up to the upside. So one thing I want to mention though, before we get into that, is that look at what this is doing. So this is an 18 below the 40 and both lines are declining. So in this time frame, we have a downtrend. In this time frame, we still have an uptrend. Now this is getting pretty close to switching to neutral. And this actually could potentially be switching to neutral as well. If this 18 rolls over or flattens out and this 18 turns around and flattens out, both of these trends could actually turn neutral. But in the current situation, you could be looking for a 1, 2, 3 change in trend, right? I mean, we have an opposing trend. We have a trend to the upside here, and we have an opposing trend on the daily, and now we're breaking the downtrend line. So normally I'd be sitting here saying, okay, let's come down and test this area and then turn back to the upside. And maybe that's how this is going to play out. I mean, it's possible that that's how this is going to look, but I did think it was important to recognize the fact that both these moving averages are declining and they're going in the opposite direction of these lines, which are rising to the upside. Now, I want to bring in this other information because, as you know, I don't just buy a trend line break. I like to look at other information and look at what's happened on the daily chart. I think this chart is the one we need to zero in on. So we've pulled back, and I showed you on Tuesday when I was showing the change in trend. We broke the trend line, we rallied back up to the moving averages, and then we came down and took out this low. Now, we didn't take it out by much, and we really only took it out for a day. On a closing basis, we closed below that low, and then the next day it gapped right up and got going to the upside. So you never know how long these trends are going to last. And in reality, I like to say, oh, the trend has changed for now. I don't know how long it's going to last, but for now it has changed. Now, the fact that we've come up through this trend line tells me that we are back in transition again. Okay, that doesn't mean we're going back to the upside. And it doesn't mean that the downside is over. We don't know yet. But we've had enough strength and we've gotten back above the daily 18. I'd like to see that line cup around a little bit more to get a little bit more confirmation, but we have gotten through that line and we have broken the downtrend line. So I would consider this back into a transitional phase. Transition means we aren't in an uptrend and we're not in a downtrend. And the reality is, I know what I said on Tuesday was that you break the trend line, you make the lower high, you make a lower low, and that's a 1, 2, 3 change in trend. And that is true. We have that change in trend. Now, what I call a change in trend, I like to use in multiple time frames. The reality is you need a series of lower highs and lower lows. So I would prefer to have confirmation of a downtrend is to make this a lower low and then another lower high. So we'd have to come down and make a lower high and lower low. But because I'm looking at multiple time frames, I will use presumptive evidence. And in this case, the fact that we took out this low after breaking the trend line, I think is enough reason to consider this trend to be broken into the downside. And it's confirmed by the moving average environment. So I think the key thing is this overrun of MACD and the fact that the ADX is so strong to the downside. I mean, normally you'd be looking at this opposing trend and saying, okay, how is the ADX? Well, ADX is really bearish. This is very strong selling here. I'm not all that interested in buying a pullback or a change in trend or reversal back to the upside based on how bad the MACD sold off and below zero and how strong the ADX is to the downside. I think this is going to take more time. So that's where I stand right now. I think we're in sort of a transitional phase. Now, if you look at what happened today, we had this gap up and had a really big day. And then by the end of the day, it came down pretty close to where it opened. So not a great finish. We'll have to see what happens on Friday today. If it's really has another follow through to the downside, kind of starts fall back to the upside and works through this gap area, then I think we have a little bit more to worry about. Again, based on what I'm seeing down here, I'm not really expecting a big up move quite yet. Now, we can look at the hourly chart. We can see that we broke the trend line, and you want to do this type of analysis on all your trends, on all your time frames. You broke the trend line, came down and tested. We actually overran that low just a little bit and then turned back up. Now, we didn't take out this high, but we pulled back, and then we took it out the next time actually via a gap today on Thursday. So now we've got this horizontal trend here. Or that was the level that kind of shifted the trend back to the upside. So now we're kind of doing the same thing going back to the upside, and we're going to see if this trend reverses back down. So you just got to keep following the movement of price and do it in multiple time frames. But I want to make sure you look at the difference. If you looked at this 5, 6, 7 weeks ago, these were all pluses pretty much. Now we were losing momentum. And they weren't negative, but we didn't have positive momentum. Now we've actually got some negatives in here. We got the daily chart is down right now. We could be losing. The weekly could, the trend could actually go from positive to neutral. So definitely some question marks developing on these conditions here. All I can tell you is you got to be fluid right now. We got a lot of volatility. I wouldn't get overly bullish based on this price action the last couple of days. But based on what's going on in the sentiment numbers, I don't think you want to be overly bearish either. I'm just going to touch on quickly the QQQ, because this one has only rallied back up to the 18. This is another one where the daily chart is showing a lot of negative ADX, and the zero line was run over by a pretty significant margin. The good news I would tell you about the Qs is that we're coming into this support area, 345, 346, 347. It's not that far away. So we almost came pretty close. We hit 350. I don't know that I would really consider that a reversal. And I think our best case scenario in both of these indexes is sort of a sideways consolidation pattern, is what I would be expecting if this is really stabilizing right now. The only other thing I wanted to mention is look at this setup. I talked about Bitcoin. It had pulled back on the monthly and started to turn up, and then we are testing this 40,000 area, and we held it and came back up, formed a pinch, and then worked our way up. So the MACD gave a really nice pinch play setup, and then as you cross back up through the moving averages, gave a really nice follow-through signal. So I think this is pretty bullish what's going on here. And we have the potential for this to continue to follow through. I would expect resistance up at 60, though. Don't expect this to be a straight-up affair. This is still one of the most volatile instruments I think I've ever seen. If you're going to play this, you have to be willing to accept all the volatility that goes along with it. All right? That's the update for the week. Post any questions or comments, and we'll see you next time.